began in Luke chapter 4. As you guys may remember, we were in Luke chapter 4 on the first night. We're not going to be there right now, so don't feel like you need to go there right this second. But we were in Luke chapter 4, and we talked about this idea of God's values and our values may not always be in alignment. And we kind of gave some examples of this throughout Scripture, that even though we want to have God's values, sometimes God's values, God's ways are not our ways. And that's just the reality. Even as we study them and learn more about them, His ways are beyond our ways. And that's a real challenge for us, because sometimes we look at the world and we think, why is it not clicking the way I think it should? If I were God, and you just think about this. I mean, if you were God, how might you handle life differently? You know, I look at, you know, there is precedence for this. We have precedence in the Old Testament of God taking Joseph and making him a leader under Pharaoh. We have precedence of God taking Daniel and making him a leader. If God wanted to right now, he could snap his fingers and Terry could be president of the United States. And wouldn't it be a better country if Terry were president of the United States? I really believe that, by the way. I think you could do a great job. But if God wanted to do that, He could. So then the question then becomes, then why doesn't He? Why doesn't He? You know, if you think about like some of the hurdles we face in life, like could you imagine if this congregation just, if we just got $1 million out of the clear blue, wouldn't that just help? It seems like that would just help, and I know you guys and I know your personalities. I don't think you guys would squander it. I'm not worried about you guys doing something bad with it. That's not a concern of mine. And so then the question becomes this: what, God, you're the God of the cattle on 1,000 hills. Couldn't you give us $1 million if you wanted to? Couldn't you just drop $1 million into our laps and just take care of things? Or couldn't you just resolve some of these problems, some of these conflicts that we face? And then the obvious question is, why doesn't He? Why doesn't He? And so these are the challenges that we face. And so we've been looking at this idea. Tonight we come to this concept of pushing against the wall. They say for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction. If we are going to become more like God, we are going to have to push against something. We're going to have to push against something. David Copperfield. I tell you what, I just loved magic as a kid. And David Copperfield, right after we saw that show, I told you guys last night, we went and saw him. He performed the amazing, miraculous trick of passing through the Great Wall of China. Did you guys ever see that? Basically took a box and, there was a light flashing through the box, a lamp going through the box. Took a box and he put curtains around every side so you could see through it. And he stepped into the box and he walked through the Great Wall of China in front of a live group of people. And then the camera went around to the other side. No camera break. Camera went around to the other side. And they put another box on there. And he tried to push through, and it was a little bit difficult. And then he finally did, and he walked all the way through the Great Wall of China. Man, amazing trick. Now here's the thing. He didn't really do it, okay? In case you didn't know. Anytime our perspectives of life contradict the laws of physics, we have to ask the question, did that really happen? He did not actually go through the Great Wall of China. What actually took place is this. There was a set of stairs, and when he walked into the booth, he slipped down into some stairs underneath, and then they took the stairs, and they walked them around to the other side, and put him up against the wall, and he slipped out of those stairs and then came out on the other side. Now, what about the shadow? There was a shadow of him. Well, the way the light was positioned had it so that David Copperfield's assistant, who was hiding in that same spot, replaced him, came up into the light. Nobody could tell that he was stepping out of that. It looked like there's just a natural transition. And he walked up, and then when he pushed up against the wall, it looked like he was pushing against the wall and going into the wall. All he was doing is stepping out of the range of the light bulb. So it looked like he passed through the wall. And then after he passed through the wall, then they go around to the other side, and once again, the David Copperfield just comes out of the stairs, And he's able to make it look like he went through the Great Wall of China. Super easy trick, but at the end of the day, it involves somebody passing through a wall. Now, we can say this idea here, it's a lot harder to push up against a real wall than a fake wall, right? And sometimes in our lives, we're having to push up against things that actually have substance to them. And think about all the things that we have to push up against in our world that have deep, serious substance to them. Maybe you've had to push against family sometimes. Have you ever had to push against family? You ever had to push against the belief system of family? And it has real substance. And when you push against it, it's hard. It's hard as a rock. It's hard to push against family. It's hard to push against history. Maybe you grew up in a world where things were done a certain way. And maybe even there's a belief in your mind that because you are who you are, you're supposed to be a certain way. And so to push up against that's very, very hard. And so this is kind of the idea that we are talking through today. Now I want to show you very quickly, chart it out a little bit here, kind of where we've gotten to this point. We started off with principles. This was our very first class. We said, hey, principles are crucial because principles lead to our practices. Who you are, what you think is your value system will ultimately lead to your practices. And then we went from principles and we said the very next step is our perceptions. When we have core principles, things that we value, then we begin to see the world a certain way. And once we see the world a certain way, then we begin to have priorities, the things that we focus on. And finally, practices, those things that we do. So we can think about this for just a moment. We can go back to the Pharisees. What was the principle? What principles did the Pharisees hold to? We asked this question last night. So what principles did the Pharisees hold to? Well, the Pharisees wanted to look good. We know that. So they were all about being seen as valuable. That was a core principle. If being seen as valuable as a core principle, then what was their perception? How did they see the world? I need to be seen as valuable. When they're interacting with Jesus, Jesus is performing miracles. How do they see Jesus? As somebody who should make them look valuable, right? And because of their perceptions, what does their priority become? Be made valuable. I'm going to do everything in my power so that people can see me as valuable. And then what's their practice? Well, their practice may have been to attack Jesus, to try to destroy Jesus. Okay? Let's go back 400 years. Let's say the core principle is honor the king. Honor the king. Okay? So if honor the king is my core principle, what is my perception of life? How do I see the world? Who's the most valuable? The king. The king's the most valuable. Okay, why do I make money? For the king. Why do I go from shepherding to farming? The king. Why do I get in the career path that I do, or raise my children to be the way that they are, or choose the education I choose, or whatever the thing is? It's all for the king. And because that's my perception, then my priority is that very thing. I'm going to make the king special. That's my priority. So what do? I do it. I make the king special. Okay? Let's go back to the United States. Let's say whenever, at the very beginning, 1776. Okay? 1776. What was a core principle in 1776? Freedom. Yeah, freedom. No question about it. Core principle is freedom. Okay? How do I see the world? What's my perception of the world? We got to be free. Isn't that right? We got to be free. What's my priority? Becoming free. What's my practice? Yeah, dump tea into the ocean, into the Boston Harbor, right? Which, by the way, wasn't everybody's practice. There's this interesting story that Benjamin Franklin actually paid for a lot of that tea. He paid back England, which is really interesting to me because Benjamin Franklin had a really neat faith. So he decided, hey, I'm going to pay back some of that tea. But because the principle said, this is what you're to do, and this is how you're to do it, let's do it, and it ultimately resulted in people dumping tea into the harbor. And Benjamin Franklin saying, hey, I don't think that was the best move. Somebody's going to pay for that tea. I'm going to pay for it. Okay? What is our core principle, or what are our core principles? And this is where it gets tense, because sometimes our core principles are in line with Texas. Sometimes our core principles are in line with the West. Sometimes our core principles are in line with America. But our core principles must never not be in alignment with Jesus. God has core principles too. And our core principles must be in alignment with God. If America comes out and says, hey, it's okay if you do XYZ. Let's say homosexual marriage. It's okay for you to have homosexual marriage. That's okay. America says that. It's all right. It's not a big deal. We have to contrast that with the principles of God. Do the principles of God agree? Okay? If America comes out and says, hey, this whole stuff about your neighbor, yeah, you don't need to love your neighbor. Don't worry about it. We have to contrast that with the will of God. And this becomes very complicated because so many times we as a country don't hold to the principles of God. And so we're trying to not get back to the principles of the United States, but get back to the principles of God. It'd be really easy to go, well, we're trying to get back to 1776 America. And honestly, that's not the goal. What is the goal? To get back to God. To get back to God. Okay, so let's begin reading here in Matthew chapter 11. As we go through, we're going to very quickly go through this text. I want you to remember just the other day, we were in Luke chapter 4, and Jesus, remember he grabbed the scroll from Isaiah. Do y'all remember this? He grabbed the scroll from Isaiah and he began to read. What did the text say? Do y'all remember? It says, I come to proclaim good news to the poor, recovery of sight to the blind, liberty for captives. Okay? Now in this passage, we have virtually the same exact text read. Okay? So let's begin here in verse 2. John heard in prison about the deeds of Christ. So here's John, he's in prison. Here's about the deeds of Christ. He sent word by his disciples. He said to them, are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? Okay, so let's get the story. First of all, this is like Bible Bowl stuff, right? Who is John the Baptist? Anybody remember? Give me some details. Who is John the Baptist? He prepared the way for Christ. Okay, so he is the one who will prepare the way for Christ. Good. Who else is John the Baptist? Tell me some other things. What do we know about him? He's Jesus' cousin. Do you know your cousin pretty well? I know my cousins pretty well. Did y'all know one of my cousins is Aaron Watson, the country singer? Have I told y'all that? I got to brag about that every time. Yeah. Okay, so he prepared the way for Jesus, and he is Jesus' cousin. He's Jesus' cousin. What else do we know about John the Baptist? Anything else? Would you say he's got a lot of faith or a little bit of faith? A lot of faith. Yeah. Do you have one?
He ate locusts.
He ate locusts. Locusts and wild honey. You know why he ate it with wild honey? It's disgusting without honey. It is disgusting without honey. Without honey, locusts is just disgusting. Yeah. So he ate locusts and wild honey. This is John the Baptist, right? Remind me, what's John the Baptist's very first encounter with Jesus? This is a trick question here. Trick question. In the womb. Yeah, in the womb. And what happened in the womb? He jumped. This is such a funny story, isn't it? Like his mom and Mary walk up and they're talking to each other and John jumps in the womb. Okay? So they're both babies at the same time, living in the same part of the world, right? Cousins. Knows about him, even pre-birth, as we get the sense here. Okay? Then the next interaction we see, what's the next interaction we see? Is the baptism of Jesus. What happens at the baptism? What does John say about Jesus at the baptism? Y'all remember? I'm not worthy to untie his sandals. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. I'm not the Christ. If I were, I would have told you, he who's come after me is before me because he's before me. Such a weird terminology, phrase there. But the point is this. Does John know Jesus? Very well. Very, very, very well. Okay, now, why is John in prison? Somebody tell me that. Do y'all remember? These stories are they're so convoluted here because there's so many pieces and characters. But somebody remind me, what happened to John to get him in prison? Yes, that's exactly right. He told the king, you're not supposed to be with your brother's wife. And as a result, what's going to happen to John the Baptist? He's going to have his head chopped off and placed on a silver platter. He doesn't know that's coming, but it's coming. Okay? So John is in the middle. He's this little footnote in history in the middle of his job and his death. And here he is. Now he's in prison and he sends this message to Jesus. Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? Any theories on why he asked this question? Any theories? Are you the one who's to come, or should we expect somebody else? Any theories? Is it because he doesn't know who he is? I don't even know that guy. Who is that guy? It's not because he doesn't know him. Any theories?
Maybe he didn't act like he thought he would.
Yes, that's exactly what I think. I think he didn't act like he thought he would. What did he think Jesus should act like? Liberating captives. Liberating captives. Recovery of sight to the blind. Good news to the poor. Well, who's captive here? John the Baptist. Shouldn't John be released from prison? I think so. Who should release you? Your cousin should. I'll tell you what, some cousins get famous and they just forget all about their little cousins. Well, anyway, that's a whole other story. All right, so, verse 4, I'm joking, of course. Jesus answered, verse 4, Jesus answered, go tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news preached to them, and blessed is the one who is not offended by me. All right, so first of all, Jesus responds with essentially the same thing he said in Luke chapter 4 when he's reading the scroll. What did he say? The blind can see, good news is preached to the poor. He did leave out the captives. I don't know if he just didn't want to rub salt in the wound here or what, but he does leave that part out. But here's the point. I am who I claim to be. I am who I claim to be. I'm the one. But blessed is he. Blessed is the one who isn't offended by me. Just out of curiosity, why do you think he said that? Just based on the conversation we're having here, the flow of conversation. Why do you think he might say to John, blessed is the one who's not offended. Blessed is the one who doesn't fall away or stumble. Jesus is called a stumbling block many times. Why do you think he would say to John, blessed are you if you don't stumble over me, if you're not put off by me? Maybe because Jesus doesn't act the way people think he should act. Last night we talked about Jesus is very compassionate. Remember that? Jesus is very compassionate. He sees someone hurting and he has a lot of compassion on them. But tonight we see this about Jesus. Jesus is also, while he's very compassionate, he's very empathetic, he cares very, very much. Something else about Jesus. Jesus is very offensive. He's not just offensive to the world. Okay, we all know he's offensive to the world. We all know that when Jesus is talking about marriage, it's offensive to the world. We all know that when Jesus is talking about sin, it's offensive to the world. But he's offensive to the faithful. Here's a faithful person going, okay, God, are you going to deliver me? And Jesus says, hey, I need you to know this. I can be offensive. I hope I'm not offending you by not coming and delivering you. But that does happen. Have you ever been offended by God not doing things the way you thought he should do them? Has it ever been hurtful to you that God hasn't handled the situation the way you thought he should?